Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, and every now and again, a very interesting game will cross my desk. In this case, I'm here to talk about Tainted Grail, the Fall of Avalon. When this was presented to me, it was described as indie Skyrim, and I went, okay, settle down. Last time a game was compared to Skyrim was either, in my case, for my review, Elden Ring, which is pretty high praise, or before all of that, it was in a negative way for Dragon Age Inquisition, where I was talking about the hinterlands, not really understanding what Skyrim had accomplished, but just trying to emulate its look and its feel and its boundless sense of content. So when I hear independent and Skyrim in the same sentence, that intrigues me because, number one, I don't see a lot of developers really reach for that exact Bethesda Game Studio style experience, like first-person immersion, interactive world, even the way conversations are presented. The only one I can think of is one of my favorite developers ever alongside Bethesda Game Studios, in Obsidian Entertainment. You can see their games, their DNA is closely intertwined with that of some of my favorite developers, whether it be a BioWare or, in this case, we're talking about a Bethesda Game Studios. And so looking at Tainted Grail, when I was presented with this game, I went, this looks really interesting. Now, you already know my rule when it comes to these types of videos, which are sponsored, is that I'm extremely picky with them, and I got to be able to say my piece. And you already know my rule. For those who don't, when it comes to early access games, I will try them out. I'll dip my toe in the pool, see what's going on there, see if I like it, and decide from there if I'll see it at 1.0. But even with something as great as Baldur's Gate 3, I tried out early access for 2 hours and said, I will see you at launch, and that's when I put all of my hours in. For me, it's just a good way to get a taste of the vision and kind of start to see what this can build into. So I did just that with Tainted Grail. Shout out to them for sponsoring today's video. Let's talk about this game because I have a lot of good to say. Also, I feel this game needs a lot of work, quite frankly. There's a lot of bugs here. There's a lot of things that are just missing at times. Dialogue is missing. Audio lines are missing, where I can see the potential, but sometimes it's muddied, even in the face of early access, by things like this. And to be fair, I'm not really cranking the game heavily for this. It's super early access. This sort of stuff is to be expected, and I would be more critical of it if it was at the 1.0 version. I had the opportunity to try the newest update in 0.8, which overhauls their skill system, their attribute system. It rebalances combat. For me, though, all of this was new, so I'm just going to generally talk about my experience with this game thus far. So if you're new here and you're into what's going on with RPGs that are at least like Bethesda, consider subscribing. To quickly warm us up, for those who don't know, Tainted Grail, the Fall of Avalon actually began as a board game in a dark mythical world which blend together Arthurian legends and Celtic mythology into this very dark place. So it has a very unique kind of storyline to set things up. But while I'll be using Elder Scrolls as a lot of my touchstones here because I've not played the board game, just know that this existed for a while as a board game before being adapted into a video game that is very Elder Scrolls coded, to say the least. I want to start off by talking about the intro of the game because, wouldn't you guess it, where does this start but where every other Elder Scrolls game begins? In a prison. So right away I go, okay, I'm starting to see the Bethesda Game Studios inspiration right away. Conversations are just happening in world. The camera's not really moving. It's very Skyrim-like, where the character is standing maybe half a mile away from you, and it's what you would actually see in real life, but just not a lot of games frame the conversation that way. They'll do something like, in the case of RPGs such as this, you'll think of the Outer Worlds, or you'll think of what Starfield does, where they'll pull the camera into the character speaking. But it wasn't until Starfield added the ability to turn off the dialogue camera that I learned how much I appreciated this more in-world approach to dialogue and interactions. Anyway, as always, in a Elder Scrolls style experience, it begins with that prison breakout. And so in the process of doing that, one thing that immediately impressed me is the strange balance between very familiar Bethesda jank, where I'm like, oh, none of this really looks visually impressive, but it's functional, to moments in this game where it looks insane. Like, you see this almost H.R. Geiger level inspired environments with really fantastic lighting in an early access state especially. It's really surprising how good it looks, where I'm looking going, hey, some of these locations look really awesome. And by the way, when you fire this up, if you don't want to do the prologue and you just want to jump around to different acts in the game, try out different builds, that's what I did. Again, this is a great way for me to dip my toe in the pool. So I tried out Act 2, which was level 20, later game builds, and I got to see more of the open world, which we'll get into in a moment here. But just on the point of visuals, there were just moments I was really stunned by how great this game looked when it was raining and I was wandering this open world and the music was hitting. I went, huh, this is a familiar, great feeling. But to know it's coming from an indie team is pretty exciting. So what are they doing that's different from that Bethesda Game Studios experience? Okay, you see a lot of the familiar calling cards here. I've already broken those down. Where does it make itself different? I think the first thing is the importance of stats. I noticed one piece of loot that I tried to pick up the other night actually required endurance. Now, I like this sort of approach here because it does reward some level of build crafting. And this game does function a lot like, I would say, a Dark Souls, where there's a bonfire system. That's another way it differentiates itself. So when you're trying to level up, you're actually going to have to sit at a bonfire. You're going to have to rest, and that's where you'll go ahead and put points into your various skill trees, put points into your attributes, that sort of thing. And these skill trees are a lot of passive bonuses that go across things like strength, dexterity, and so on. These will impact things from your attack speed to your health amount to your single-handed damage. And how do you level up, you may be asking? It's just like Skyrim. You're going to go around and, let's say I'm using a one-handed weapon a lot, you're going to see that skill go up as you use it more. You're going to use magic. That skill is going to go up as you use it more. As you kill enemies, you're going to gain experience, and that's where you sit at the bonfire and you level up. There's a little bit more of a survival element here. I don't know if it's because it's purely in the early access phase or it's just unbalanced. It's really hard to tell at this stage in the game, which again is why I wait until 1.0 to fully assess things. But in the case of right now, it feels a lot more difficult where I have to really bob and weave my way out of combat. I do like the movement abilities they give you. There's a big dash ability that's extremely useful. You can parry in this combat system, although I did not like how it felt and I struggled to do it very often. I thought that the best combination really was magic and dashing around, because that way I was able to stay safe and be in the fray whenever I really wanted to. Whereas when you're using melee, you're spending stamina like it's no one's business. So I was just whiffing away, smacking away, running out of stamina. When you run out of stamina, you can't block. And the other twist here to this combat system, before I get more into it mechanically, is how much your armor weight really affects things. Not just in how much stamina you spend when you say dash around, but also it affects things like when you run out of stamina, which I was fine enough in the early parts of the game wearing very light armor. I was tapping it out constantly. It was regenning. I was like, not really much punishment to it. And then I killed a bunch of enemies, got some heavier armor. And I was like, okay, let's go, because I was starting to get hit a lot. I was running out of healing supplies. So I thought to myself, this will be a good change for me, certainly. Only to learn that after I tapped out my stamina with heavier armor, I'm really like slugging around, just trying to drag myself into this fight, waiting for that stamina to recover. So again, build crafting is really important. Paying attention to these sort of mechanics is more important. And what this accomplishes compared to something like Skyrim is that now I don't feel like it's just me doing the same two-handed power attack combo that I always spam in Skyrim. It's just that combat's a little bit more thoughtful. Not going to oversell it to you like this is the most incredible thing you will ever experience, but it does make it more engaging. And I tried everything from a little bit of archery, which originally, according to the devs, was busted, and so they nerfed that a bit, all the way into magic and melee combat. I came away liking magic. I thought the VFX system actually looked pretty good in its early access state. I thought the impact was there, the sound was there. And most of this game, from what I experienced, is voiced, like a lot of the high moments are, but it eventually gets more sporadic as you spend time in this world. There'll be times I talk to random NPCs, I'm like, oh, they're actually voiced, cool. Versus other times I'll talk to random NPCs, even some in the main story, and they're not voiced. I think it's those sorts of uneven moments throughout this early access period that throw people off, but to the developers' credit, they are allowing you to just see different pockets of the game and how that experience evolves and how these locations evolve from the prologue to Act 1 and 2. But like I mentioned earlier, there is a survival Souls-like element to it in that resting at the bonfire. And when you're resting at the bonfire, you're going to cook. So you're going to grab all these ingredients while you're roaming around the world. And that was my main form of healing. Even in the late game, that was my main form of healing too. Like I was collecting meat and potatoes and vegetables and making meals out of them. Now, the thing that is really interesting about healing in this game that I think they're going to want to fine tune is actually when it comes down to that food healing you and pushing past your health cap. So I've had food that'll heal like 138 health over 8 seconds. And what'll happen is when I'm healing, enemies will try to hit me and my health will quickly regen and just keep refilling over and over. And so what happens is when you have really good food, you kind of get this bit of invulnerability, I think unintentionally so, where enemies will slap away at you, but it doesn't really matter because you're still getting the effects of the healing from the food you just ate. and I think it makes it a little bit too easy at certain points in time. Now, in fairness, the combat can be a little bit difficult. Like, there's a lot of, I think, again, methodically approaching it. You don't want to fight 3 enemies at once like you would in Skyrim. You kind of want to pull them out one by one. The unfair part is you'll see sometimes projectiles just home in on you. Like, you'll see them shoot at you, you'll kind of dash out of the way, and it'll still track you and hit you. Again, that's the early access isms that I talk about, which kind of keep me in that state of not moving away from my kind of current stance of like, oh, you're not in 1.0 yet, then I'm gonna wait until the vision is complete. Because stuff like that will just irritate me over time, and I just want to see if the vision is complete, if that is still a problem. It's funny because I'm making all of these Bethesda Game Studios comparisons, but I realize I haven't really told you about the world here. Like, right now I'm just selling you like a fantasy open world game with Skyrim level kind of mechanics. But what's happening in this open world is actually really interesting. So what's happening is King Arthur has been dead for a while, and the humans who are in Avalon are just trying to find a new way of life. However, there's this thing called the Red Death, and it's spreading wordness, which is making things much, much worse. What'll happen throughout the prologue is King Arthur, at least part of him, is with you. And it's one of those things like in a Bethesda Game Studios game where you're wondering, well, why is everyone saving me? What's so important about me? It's like, prisoner A, you actually might be more important than you quite realize. So it sets up that sort of story. And there are guilds in this game, which is, again, a highlight of the Elder Scrolls world. So you'll have like an alchemist guild or a blacksmith guild, and they will have their own separate quest lines. But one thing they added in this patch is more of an open-ended quest design. For example, the captain you meet in the first dialogue with the quartermaster, all these side quests that were once mandatory are optional now. So kind of giving you the freedom of approach. One thing that was actually pretty funny, the devs told me, is that they added a couple of fetch quests in here too, which I'm not a fetch quest fan at all, but they added them here because the programmer actually didn't really care about the story of the world and wanted just more things to do within said world. So maybe you're like that. Maybe that lights your fire too. There's still systems they're working on that I think will fully round out this experience. Like, crimes are not here yet. VFX still need to be optimized. There were times I was shooting out my spells and the frames would drop. They're aware of these sort of things, but the kind of trade-off is like, you can farm in this game. There's crafting in this game. Like, there's a lot going on here where you can see the ambitious, and this is a team really trying to punch above their weight class. And as they're approaching 1.0, I'm really rooting for them. I want to see a lot of these kind of kinks ironed out where they have a lot of great ideas. It's just about executing and tightening them up. The game does look really good. I think it plays pretty fine. The UI in a lot of instances is really primitive. There's times I would like to see that spiced up a little bit, but certainly as someone who's in the middle of developing their own game, I get it. A lot of times you just need placeholders to make sure functionality can exist, and then you make that all pretty. It's a natural process, and you get to see a lot of that here. So for me, as like a dev, I kind of like seeing this sort of thing, but I get that's just like me being a nerd and not necessarily like, oh, you're looking at this as a potential thing you might buy. So ultimately, I'll say this. Keep your eye on it. Definitely if you're like me and you love the Bethesda Game Studios experience, this is worth, in my opinion, at the very least, taking a look at. It's up to you at the end of the day. Like, is this worth it? Is it not? You know my rule when it comes to early access. I like to wait till we hit 1.0. I'll check it out there for myself and give you my final verdict. But it was one of those early access experiences for me where I didn't walk away going, oh my God, this is going to be perfect. This is going to be incredible. But I see loads of potential here. I'm really hoping it all turns out well. And at 1.0, I'll definitely be reviewing the game. I think it looks really good. So shout out to Tainted, Grail, The Fall of Avalon. Really cool game thus far, especially for someone who has Bethesda Game Studios level taste. I appreciate another developer going and trying to do that. I'm curious what you all think down below on this game. Are you going to be checking out? Let me know down below. Again, thank you to Tainted Grail for sponsoring today's video, and I will catch you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.